Hello, welcome to the Comic Book Commentary. I'm Bo Lighting, and it's the first Monday of the month, which means it's time for the next issue of Spawn. So let's zoom in and take a closer look. First published in October of 1992, we see another terrific Todd McFarlane cover of Spawn perched up on top of a building, just patrolling, watching out for evil, chains all hanging out, cape all billowing in the wind. It looks super cool. I love this cover. Story, pencils, inks. Todd McFarlane. Letters and editor. Tom Orzechowski. Story consultant. Terry Fitzgerald. Color. Steve Oliff, Ruben Rude, and Ali Optics. Here on the first page, we get an introduction to a new character in the Spawn universe, and that character is Billy Kincaid, who has spent the past 5 years in a mental institution, court-ordered because he was convicted of killing the daughter of a New York State senator. And while he did kill that one girl, we're going to find out that despite being convicted of her murder, there were some other murders that he was not convicted of. We see here one of the psychiatrists talking to Billy in the facility that he's in. He's been locked up there as part of his punishment for the conviction of the murder. We see that there are police officers here standing by the door. We see Sam and Twitch in the background who were instrumental in getting the conviction. And we find out that Billy is being released mostly because his lawyer has been working tirelessly over the last 5 years to find a way to get him released. Apparently, he found some sort of very obscure loophole or technicality, and that in combination with Billy's psychiatrist testifying that he believes he is in fact cured of, I guess, the psychosis or some sort of mental illness that he apparently suffered from and is no longer in danger to society. However, we see that Sam and Twitch are not buying this at all, especially Sam, who is very upset at the probability of Billy being freed back into the world. And Sam's anger and frustrations are very much well-founded, as we see here on the next page. Billy is not even listening to the psychiatrist talk. He is simply just going over in his mind all of the times that he kidnapped and murdered all of these kids. And while he was only convicted of the one murder, he remembers here that it was actually 27 children that he kidnapped and killed. And he remembers to himself that these were the fun times that he will never forget. We see here on the next page that Billy is told by his doctor that he will be released the following morning. And as he walks by Sam and Twitch, he begins to sing a song, "You Scream, I Scream, We All Scream for Ice Cream." And Sam is not amused. He very quickly asks, "What was that?" The doctor proceeds to tell him it's just a little song that he's been teaching to the other people in the hospital. And that's when Sam just loses his cool and just starts yelling at the doctor, telling him that there's no way that Billy's cured after 5 years and that he is going to go out and murder again. And just because they only, were able to prove that he murdered the one girl, they know for a fact that he had to have had something to do with all of the other murders of the children whose bodies they found in the town that Billy was from. But the doctor quickly points out that they were never able to prove that and that the law has to be followed. And we see here that this is a real bone of contention for Sam, because while he knows in his heart that Billy is a dangerous man who is hell-bent on killing kids, that at the same time, it is his duty to uphold the law, and that, he can't just go around and do whatever he wants because of that duty. We see here that he just keeps struggling with it, as we're also shown images of Spawn lying in an alleyway in New York City. And we see here on the bottom, his power level is now at 8,092. We see here on the next page the news reports speaking about the release of Billy Kincaid, and that he was in fact convicted of killing the senator's daughter, and that there was also a lot of other things going on at that time. The senator had just lost his re-election bid the prior year because it was exposed that he was cheating on his wife with a former Miss Universe. And they take it as professionally as they can, both on CNN and the E! Network. Not sure how Todd was still getting away with using these logos at this point, but he was. But on the bottom here, we see, of course, the third reporter who always seems to have the hot take. And he says that despite the fact that Billy Kincaid is now loose on the streets and is a convicted child murderer, that means he's no longer locked up away from the rest of society, and that his only wish is that someone would break Billy's back, and then says, "Hello, are you listening, Mr. Shadowhawk?" Which, if you'd like to know more about Shadowhawk, check out my video on Shadowhawk #1, but is a nice little callback and reference to another Image character. We are then teleported to the home of Wanda Blake, who is putting her daughter down to sleep, and we see in her crib is either a Cerebus plushie or perhaps the real Cerebus. We don't know. It's not really explained in this book. But it just talks about how much she cares about her daughter and how much joy she feels for finally being a mother. And then we see an image of Spawn lying in the alleyway still. Here on the next page, we are transported back into the city proper, specifically the police department where Sam and Twitch work out of. And Sam is venting his frustrations about the fact that Billy has been released and that no one seems to be all that upset about it, surprisingly to him, as he doesn't have any kids and he's not married. However, Twitch reminds him that he has apparently 7 children and is married himself, which is the first that we, the readers, are hearing of this, and that he is also quite upset about Billy being released back into the public. Of course, he's more measured than Sam is, and Sam, isn't sure what to do. He already got in trouble because of the two of them going down to the facility in which Billy has been locked up in for the past 5 years, and Twitch suggests to him that they go on a little bit of a stakeout after hours off the clock, and they just, play it off like they're spending time together as friends in a car that just happens to be parked in the same neighborhood that Billy Kincaid is currently living in. To which Sam replies that he is totally in favor of. Here on the next page, we get once again an advertisement to go check out your local comic book store, which I highly recommend. Find a comic book store near you and check out what they've got. You'll probably have a good time. Here on the next page, we are transported to 2 days later as we see an ice cream truck driving down the street and a small child running towards it. We see, unfortunately for this child, though, that Billy Kincaid has killed the actual driver of said ice cream truck and is now luring children to this ice cream truck to kidnap them and kill them. He steps outside and tells the little girl that her dress is so pretty that she has, earned herself a free popsicle of her choice, and he tells her to hop right on the truck and grab whatever flavor she likes. And then we are teleported to his home where we see he is doing some finger painting, as he calls it, where we see that he is just gluing the fingers of this child onto a piece of construction paper and is for some reason dressed as a woman and wearing a wig. And we see the child's bloody clothes on the floor. and are then teleported to Wanda, and she's picking her daughter up from daycare and just speaking with the operator of the daycare, who's telling her how good a job she's done with her child, and if all of the kids at the daycare were as well behaved as hers, her job would be a lot easier. And then we see Spawn standing in full view of them, just right down the sidewalk, wearing a trench coat and a top hat, which would probably help him blend in if it were raining or cold, but we can only assume it's not, as it seems to be bright, sunny, green, lush, and no one else in this scenario is wearing any kind of jacket or heavy clothing because it's presumably warm outside. So Spawn just looks like a psycho standing on this sidewalk wearing this getup in the middle of the day, in the middle of the summer. Here on the next page, we once again see Spawn is still upset about the fact that he and Wanda were never able to have any children, and that he still feels guilty about not being able to give her the happiness and the child that she so desperately wanted when he was alive. And he just sulks back to the city, where we see him get together for the first time with a large group of the city's homeless in the alleyways. This goes on to become a very common behavior for Spawn, and he ends up having, I don't know if I'd call it a friendship, but acquaintances and relationships with some of the homeless men who are living in New York City. And they're all huddled around the fire, talking, trying to make jokes, drinking cheap booze with each other. And then they all fall asleep afterwards, when suddenly a NYPD cruiser just barrels through the alley and just starts ramming through boxes and trash cans. All of the homeless guys have to scramble. We see the banter between the cops here, as one of them is complaining about all these bums just blocking the alleyway and how they're trying to get to a robbery to stop it, but it's just pure chaos as everyone's just scrambling to get out of the way of the car. However, we see here on the next page that apparently one of the homeless men named Joey was not able to get out of the way of the cruiser and was instead run down by said cruiser and killed, which infuriates some of the other men who are just angry and just distraught about the death of their friend, and really upset about the fact that the police are the ones responsible for it, saying how the police don't care about protecting anyone or keeping anybody safe, and wouldn't even take the time to pump the brakes when they realized that there were people in the way of the cruiser. And that's when one of the men brings up that, the police have done nothing to help them. They just killed one of their friends. And on top of that, they've just let a baby killer by the name of Billy Kincaid out of prison, to which Spawn suddenly gets a memory jarred that he knows exactly who Billy Kincaid is, and is surprised that he's out already, but then remembers that it's been 5 years that he's been gone from the world of the living. On the next page, we get, once again, an advertisement for the comic book greats with an order form that you could cut out and send away to order this video series. But there's only one problem with that, and that problem is that if you wanted to cut out this order form and mail away said form to get any of these videos or all of these videos, you were going to have to ruin the comic book, because on the very next page, we see this. We, in fact, have more story on the backside of that order form. You can see here that if you were to cut out that order form, you'd knock out the entire bottom half of this page, forever ruining the comic book. I can't believe they printed it up this way. It should have been something that appeared on, at the very least, the reverse inside cover, or was its own separate pull-out form. I'm surprised that they would have done it like this, that in a way that would have caused you to do irreparable damage to the book in order to order any of those videos. However, the story continues. We see here that after the senator's daughter was murdered, the senator then went to Al Simmons, aka Spawn, and hired him to go out and kill Kincaid and not take chances with the legal system. So Al goes out. Unfortunately, he couldn't track Kincaid down fast enough to find him before the police. However, he does remember finding it very odd that when he saw Kincaid being arrested, that Kincaid was smiling and smirking about it and couldn't figure out why he wasn't more upset about being arrested. And then he recalls that Kincaid had this exact same smile and smirk on his face when he was sentenced to prison. But that's when Spawn remembers that just after that happened is when they found a shack in Northern Virginia, or Northern West Virginia, where there were tons and tons of mutilated body parts of children all piled into this shack, and the shack itself belonged to one Billy Kincaid. Here on the next page, we get a full spec list of Spawnmobile number 1. And if you're wondering what Spawnmobile number 1 is, you're in luck, because it looks like this. Awesome, look at this rotted out dragster ready to hit the streets. All about the racing. This thing rules, man. We see here that it is indeed a Spawnmobile. And I should point out that Todd did co-design the paint scheme for this car, as we can see the Spawn logo on the side with some Necro energy kind of trailing off the back end. And as we look here at the top-down photo, we can see the Spawn logo and the Spawn symbol up here on the back windshield. And this is 100% a fully NHRA certified dragster. We've got the parachutes on the back. This thing is designed specifically for racing, and it's pretty cool, but it's not as cool as what we see on the next page. It gets even cooler when we find out that this is not the only Spawnmobile. There's also Spawnmobile number 2, which we're going to get a look at in Spawn number 7, which will also contain a full pull-out poster. Here we see on the next page that Spawn is remembering more about the circumstances around Kincaid's conviction, and that a lot of the evidence that they collected from the shack was disappearing from files. The shack itself was blown up, not burned down, but blown up. And that his former boss, Jason Wynn, basically called off the dogs from the government and, said that the case was over. And he and Al came to a really heavy argument about why all of a sudden everything about this case was being dropped, despite the mountain of evidence and mountain of bodies that they had, that he felt Billy Kincaid was completely guilty of all these murders. However, he decides at this point that it's time for him to right a wrong, and that now that he's back from the dead and has all the powers of the Hellspawn, that he's going to make sure that he takes care of the one that got away. Here on the next page, we see that Spawn is dealing with a bit of a renaissance now as to what his convictions are and what his goals are going forward. He's kind of put the whole loathing and depression that he was feeling from having met the Mabulja and being told that he was just a puppet behind him, as he decides that he now has a purpose of going out and righting a wrong from his previous life and taking care of Billy Kincaid. I think it's funny, though, that we see this image of Spawn jumping off of a building with the cape flared out and the chains going wild and whatnot, and it looks really cool. But what doesn't make sense is that on the page prior to this, Spawn was down in the alleyways with all of the homeless guys, which means that he would have had to have climbed a building and then jumped off of said building for us to get this shot, We're then teleported to the inside of Sam and Twitch's car as the two of them are talking amongst themselves, just kind of passing the time as they keep an eye on Kincaid's house. And Sam brings up that he's still really surprised about the fact that no one seems to care about Kincaid being released, and that the two of them seem to be the only ones who are really, just trying to keep an eye on the situation and try and send him back to prison. And they continue to talk. And then we see, as they're just having a conversation between themselves, that Spawn is leaping into action right above their heads. Here on the next page, we get an advertisement for American Comics and Entertainment in Gainesville, Virginia, where you could order comic books through the mail, which, again, I don't know if this was all that great of a service, but if you had no other way of buying comic books, then it was probably one of your best options. And then after that, we're back into the story. We see that Spawn is stalking Kincaid's house. Kincaid is inside, and he's upset that it's night, because night means that all of the children are home safe with their parents and that he can't get to them. We see Spawn sneaking up, peering in through the window, looking in as Kincaid tries to figure out how he's going to occupy his time at night. Spawn sees the bloody clothing of the child that Kincaid grabbed earlier, realizes that he's back to his old ways, which he knew he would be, and then feels very convicted that he has to take care of this now and put a stop to it, because every child in the city basically is at risk, and possibly even Wanda's child, which really enrages him. And then we see Billy with a smile on his face as he turns around, amused by his own thoughts. We see here on the next page that Spawn begins to tap on Billy's window, which gets his attention. However, Spawn does not realize that he's also gotten Twitch's attention, as Twitch notices him standing on the outside of Billy's home and sees that he's got a cape, which Sam then can't believe that there's some sort of a superhero outside of Billy's house. Billy grabs a knife, thinking that he can handle himself. Sam, of course, leaps into action, throwing all of his donuts, he's a cop, all over the ground, grabbing his pistol. Billy starts sneaking through his house, getting ready to face the would-be intruder, but then Spawn blasts through his window. Sam and Twitch make a beeline for the door, running as fast as they can to get there, and then Billy realizes that he's not capable of handling himself when it comes to dealing with Spawn. And then on the next page, we once again get an advertisement for Wizard Magazine, because it's an Image comic from the early 90s, and all of them apparently had some sort of advertisement for Wizard Magazine somewhere within their pages. Here on the next page, we're treated to this really cool full-page illustration where we see Spawn standing over top of Billy, and Billy realizing that he's in some real trouble and that there's nothing he can do to get out of this situation. And then the door of Billy's house is kicked in by Sam and Twitch, who break in and start telling everyone to freeze, but then they realize that there's nobody there. They quickly look around the room, see that there's the blood and the child's clothing, and the child's fingers are glued up on this piece of poster board. And they comb the whole house, but can't find Kincaid. And Sam thinks that he's been able to get away. Unfortunately for them, they can't do anything at this point. We're teleported back into the city proper at the police department, and we see Sam and Twitch talking amongst themselves. Sam is really upset that they weren't able to find Kincaid, but he's hopeful that the police chief will give them a warrant for his arrest. Twitch suggests that they go out and start searching for Kincaid again on their own, but Sam basically puts that to bed. He says that it's too risky. They've already kind of pushed the envelope as much as they can within the bounds of the law, and he doesn't want to risk potentially getting Kincaid off again on some sort of technicality by, not doing everything exactly by the book. And that, at this point, their hands are kind of tied and that they can't make any more exceptions as he's opening the door to his office. But we see here on the next page that unfortunately for Billy Kincaid, Spawn is not at all bound by any rules of the law, as he has been tortured and strung up inside of Sam's office. And we see the note that he left for Sam: boys screamed and girls screamed, so I made him scream and scream and scream, indicating that he basically did his worst to make Billy's death as slow and agonizing as possible. And this is one of the more iconic images from the early days of Spawn. There was a figure that McFarlane sold, I think, as part of I want to say it was the McFarlane Toy Club or something exclusive. You had to be part of that and get it off the website. You could not get this figure in stores. The next page here, we see the spawning ground, where we're given updates about upcoming issues of Spawn and guest writers that are going to be writing issues of Spawn, and other guest illustrators who will be doing covers. We then get the standard letters that are written in from fans, one of which who mentions that he just survived Hurricane Andrew, which had just happened in Florida at this time. And unfortunately for him, he lost his entire comic book collection as his home was destroyed by the hurricane. And it's really sad. I hate to hear that happen to people. I mean, I'm glad that the guy was okay, but some of the people weren't. Hurricane Andrew, for anyone who doesn't remember, was really bad. I want to say it's possibly still to this day the most destructive hurricane that's ever hit land in Florida. I know it was like a Category 4 when it hit, and the destruction that it just ravaged across the state was really terrible. Here on the next page, we get this 2-page pinup of Spawn inside of a Catholic church, and he's protecting a nun from a bunch of demons that are just breaking their way in, ready to go on the attack. This image never happens in any of the issues that I'm aware of, but it is a pretty cool little pinup. I like seeing this. Shout out to Jason Pearson. Good work, sir. On the next page, we once again see an advertisement for Dinosaurs for Hire, and I really, really want to find an issue of Dinosaurs for Hire at some point. I don't know why, but this comic book seems so silly. I just really want to read it. And then on the next page, we get an advertisement for the comic book adaptation of Bram Stoker's Dracula the movie, published by Topps Comics. I totally forgot that Topps used to publish comics in the 90s. And this was a common thing where they would just, here's a popular movie, let's make a comic book that's just an adaptation of the movie. I'm sure it was fine, but also completely unnecessary. And if this is the kind of stuff they were putting out, it's no surprise that Topps Comics doesn't exist anymore. On the final page of the book, we get another advertisement for Pit by Dale Keown. If you'd like to know more about Pit, check out my video on Pit number 1. And on the reverse inside cover, we get an advertisement for Comic Shop News, which apparently was free and you could pick up, I'm guessing, in comic book retail stores. I don't know if this still exists. It probably does not, as I can't see that it would have a whole lot of reason to, unless it is now a website. If anybody knows, feel free to let me know in the comments. I would like to, know what this was about, if it was any good, and if it still exists in some form or another. And that was a look at Spawn number 5. It's a pretty different issue from what we've seen up until this point. This is the first issue of Spawn that didn't focus wholly on Spawn and his character motivation. We got our first, kind of standalone Sam and Twitch story, where they weren't just, ancillary characters who were relegated to a single page of the book. They were prominent throughout the entirety of the book. We got our introduction to Billy Kincaid. Oddly enough, I, for whatever reason, thought that the Billy Kincaid story of him being tracked down by Spawn and killed was something that spanned over multiple issues. I had completely forgotten that it happened all in one issue of the book. But either way, I really enjoyed this book a lot. I thought this was a really cool, just kind of turning point for the Spawn narrative, where we realize that it's about more than just Spawn and that there's an entire world being built around the character. But those are just my thoughts. You might have a different opinion. Maybe this book wasn't something that stood out to you. But at any rate, if you enjoyed today's video, please feel free to like, comment, and subscribe. And thanks for watching. Have a great day.